Director on Thermax and few other companies, as well as very well-known lawyer in the country who also does a lot of work internationally. We have a very nice lineup of panelists, and so why was this program at all conceived? At the SSB, as you know, we've been discussing several topics and areas of interest. Under Companies Act 2013, there are several queries that we've been receiving on a very regular basis. In fact, just to let you know, just about 4 days ago, there was a question on related party transaction which I received from a very senior professional with around 22 years of experience who had a question on a related party transaction which also touched upon remuneration related issues. So I'm sure all these questions are going to get discussed and debated during the day. So we have at the SSB thought of coming out with a guidance note which would be helpful on related party transactions. Related party transactions, much as all of us keep handling it on a regular basis, there are questions, queries where one needs to read the book once again, probably once, twice, 3 times over. The interplay of the several statutes today has made it more complex. To be more specific, the provisions of LODR, listing regulations, Companies Act, has made it complex with respect to listed companies. Private companies also do have issues. There are issues of interested parties who are not interested directors, who are not related parties, as well as related parties who are not interested directors. We would unravel all these stories as we go along. But coming back to the moot question, why did we think of a program? At SSB, we have discussed several of these issues in greater details, and we've also come out with a draft guidance note on this issue. Then why this program today on panel discussions? What we felt was, while we had come up with a very detailed guidance note, we said why not have an interface and an interaction even before the guidance note is released, so as to ensure that the questions which are uppermost in your minds is also addressed in the guidance note. Hence this round of panel discussion. We said rather than having a detailed discussion on the statute the way it is, let us give more time for interaction, for question answers, and take on board all these different aspects which probably may not even have a specific point of view at this juncture, but take on board the queries and give the collective wisdom of the group here, which can also be considered, and if required also take it up with the ministry subsequently. And hence this particular workshop on related party transactions was thought of. I would also like to add that some of the issues where the law is not very clear, the panelists may not be able to give you a clear response. That's not because the panelists cannot give their point of view, but because the law is not absolutely black and white. However, having said that, one can always take on board the views which could probably emerge. For example, even with respect to independent directors, the recent notification gives 2 interpretations. What happens with respect to Section 177 is an open issue even as we speak today. Of course, independent directors is not the point for discussion today, but having said that, these are issues on Companies Act 2013 which are emerging, which makes it far more interesting for all of us, all professionals, to look forward to greater corporate involvement in the years to come. Thank you very much, and I would request Narayan Shankar to take over and give a brief presentation. There are very interesting points which are brought forward by Narayan Shankar, and I must tell you, this is one session that I'm going to be sitting in the front row and listening with rapt attention, because this is absolutely superb, and I'm sure each one of you here is going to enjoy this, and as the day unfolds, it's going to be holding a lot in store. My request to all of you is, please don't hold back. Ask as many questions as you want. Ultimately, it is all these questions which is going to make our guidance note a complete compendium for any professional, whether in India or outside India, to refer to. Thank you very much.
Friends, good morning and welcome to this full day session on related parties. Savitri has lined up, started in fact panel today throughout the day. So we start with definition of related party. We go across. The next session is on ordinary cause and arm's length, and so on and so forth. Okay. So in the first session, I'll try my best to cover how related parties have gone 10x with Ind AS coming in, and what are the key issues we as industry is facing. And of course, we have got none other than Mukund Chutle, who's just going to be here, who's audit committee chairman of L&T, and Hariharan also, who's company secretary L&T, with whom we can interact and also get a lot of our issues cleared, which industry as general is facing. So first thing first, let's start with the goes and arm's length, whether it is access for whistleblowers to the chairman of the audit committee, whether it is insider trading, whether it is risk management, whether it is internal controls. I think the work of the audit committee is becoming more and more complicated, and the time I'm told the audit committee spends today is much outstripping even the main board. The audit committee chairman is also quite a favorite whipping boy for the shareholders. Recently, I'm told an auto company couldn't get their accounts cleared, and the ire of the investors was first towards the audit committee chairman. With all this, I thought we must ask you, Mukund, do you still are able to get a good night's sleep? Over to you.
Thank you. Firstly, I think thank the Company Secretary Institute for inviting me here. For us to speak before so many legal experts, for us to really take care. Coming to the subject of the audit committee, I think the question is right, but I would say why audit committee? The whole life that we go through, if you are able to distinguish very clearly the work that we do and the other things, I think the sleep is not a problem. The most important skill, because one must understand in a very proper fashion which are the companies which you are not willing to say yes. It's not a question of which company is good or bad, because the good or bad is always a subjective word. One has to understand from your own psychology which is a place where you would be willing to say yes and which is a place where you'll be willing to say no. I think that's the first point. Secondly, the word independent is talked many times. Now, independence does not mean arrogance. Independence does not mean speak what you like. Independence can only mean that at a given point of situation it is a conflict, and if your point of view is not understood properly, are you willing to step down at that point of time? Again, it does not mean arrogance, it does not mean that you are going to walk away every point of time, but independence to me would mean, are you willing to step down from any given situation, or are you getting attached so much to the people or the money or the sitting fees or whatever you may call it, to such an extent that you dither in taking your decision of going out or remaining there. I think with these two criteria, things become easy, and then the sleep at night is assured. I think that's the first point. Now, coming to the audit committee per se, yes, I think large companies like the one which he mentioned, we have about 10 audit committee meetings in a year, and even after 10 we keep on discussing amongst ourselves that are we really covering everything and how do we reduce the number, because the expectations from the audit committee have gone substantially high, and as was rightly mentioned earlier, that every scam in a country adds to one more problem. That is, you get new sections, new rules, and since I am talking before the experts in law, let me say that there are two ways in which the laws were drafted. The old laws, there used to be a lot of things in the sections, and any amendment will have to come to the parliament. I think with our experience we found that it is better to have rule making authority, and therefore keep the law as you like it, but give wider things to the rule making authority. I think as a country we are experimenting now on the other side. The rule making authority sometimes is going to such an extent, and as he pointed out in some of the illustrations, that the rules sometimes overtake the law. The rules sometimes change the position from one end to the other so much that I think all of us who work as, you can say, students, not experts of respective subjects, have to think twice before you give an opinion. I think acceptance of deposit by a company in a private company is the best illustration. 2014 till today, how many things have changed? So I think as far as the audit committee is concerned, the work is increasing, only those who can take the burden should come to that position. But end of it, one has to also understand that, I am again saying on a very lighter side, some places people believe that, look, that's only a job of Munimji.
Very nice.
You have to
Absolutely.
look at the accounts. Your job is to ensure that things are right, because as long as things are right, nobody bothers about you. If things are not right, then you're, Arey, what were you doing? I think that's our psychology. That means having sat on various places, committees, boards, etc. I'm not trying to say that the audit committee is super important, but what is normal is taken for granted. But to keep it normal, there are substantial efforts required. This is what people somehow, I think, underestimate. So I would say in case of audit committee, that seems to be the main problem, that the work done is not necessarily considered properly if there are no problems in the situation. I think that's it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Hari, coming to you, coming back to some basics, we've got so many things enshrined in related party, but many of these things there is no definition. There is no definition of goods, services. You have got a maze of financial instruments like investments, loans, guarantees, and a lot of dilemma amongst our members as to how do you deal with this?
First of all, thank you for the Institute for inviting me to this session. It's really a pleasure to address to the audience and others. Coming to related party transaction, I think this is a unique word in the Indian law. We have to simultaneously deal with what is dealt with in the Companies Act, SEBI regulations, as well as the accounting standards. As such, the accounting standards have become so complicated with the introduction of Ind AS. Even chartered accountants are finding it very difficult to understand. And 2016-17 was the first year when it was introduced, covering companies listed and unlisted of net worth of 500 crores and above. And 17-18, the other companies will be added, and 18-19 financial sector will be added. Now, what is happening is, it is not because of introduction of law complications come. Complications come because of non-alignment of different concepts under the company law, SEBI, and accounting standards. And when the authorities try to capture all the complications of the foreign law without understanding what is the background under which they were introduced, it becomes all the more complicated. For example, if you talk about related party transactions, in all the other jurisdictions, they actually cover mainly disclosure, and disclosures are all as per accounting standards. That means in foreign countries, wherever IFRS has been introduced, all the disclosures that are required will be as per IFRS, and Ind AS is almost akin to IFRS in all the respects. So if you were to follow only that, there would have been less complications. But in India, what we have done is, we have introduced also the approval concept. I think that is something very unique. Probably in UK, if you give loans to directors directly or indirectly, some provisions are there for approval. Otherwise, more or less in all the other jurisdictions, they talk about only disclosures. Coming to section 188, which is the main section governing related party transactions, unlike the LODR, you have got some 7 transactions which have been actually covered by 188. But that is not enough. But if you go to the different expressions which are used there, there is no clarification, there is no definition given for most of the concepts that have been enshrined there. For example, they use the words like goods, services, property, etc. Now, when it is not defined, you look into different acts to understand what is the meaning of all these expressions. For example, goods, immediately you will go to Sale of Goods Act and try to understand what is that. So it defines as everything that is movable. That can be, for example, if it is attached to land, whether it can be separated and sold, it includes shares, securities, everything it is included. Whereas even shares and securities are covered. Whereas if you go to the GST, shares and securities are not covered under GST. nor is it covered under the definition service under GST. So you get lots of situations where what to do. So the best thing what we do normally is follow the stricter of the two. That means whatever has been defined either in the Goods Act, Sale of Goods Act or GST, etc., you try to follow and try to apply. That's the only way we can do. Similarly, if you go to service, again it is not defined under the Companies Act. Immediately you go to the Finance Act and try to understand what is the definition there, and again under the GST. So the best way is to, as I mentioned, the best way is to include everything and look at the transaction. Property is another word which is not defined, and property, if you and it says it has to be looked at in the broadest sense possible, not in a narrow sense, because it says property of all kinds. And again, you look at different acts and try to understand what is the property. And if you go through all the definitions, everything and anything is included under the head properties, whether it is movable, immovable, actionable claim, everything, corporeal, incorporeal, everything that you can think of, right, different types of rights, everything will be included, including intangible rights like patents, trademarks, brand, everything is included. So we try to include everything and then interpret. But then what happens is, now if you say property is inclusive of investments, under the Companies Act you have got different provisions dealing with investments. So whether you need to follow, because for financial transactions primarily you have got section 185 and 186 which deal with it. The question is, if I comply with 185 and 186, should I again comply with 188? One view is that what is the underlying principle of related party transaction should be done in such a way that the same transaction can be done with a third party. So if that is the principle you have to follow, then one view is that if you follow 185 and 186, automatically the principle of related party transaction you would have followed. So there is no need to separately comply with again 188, because 185 and 186 primarily deal with approval of the board and the shareholders, etc. So, but then the other view is whether it will come under 177 of the Companies Act, again the audit committee, whether it has to approve. Now, if you look at it, when you talk about related party transaction approval, there is a separate item which says the audit committee is supposed to scrutiny loans and advances. So it's really, there is no approval under 177. But these are all views, that could be different views. Ultimately, it all depends upon the circumstance of the company, and you have to take a view. But generally, all good companies take a very, very conservative view and try to comply with everything that is possible. And that adds to more and more complications in corporate life.
Hari, do you include brand within the purview of goods? And specifically when you are allowing your brand to be used by your related parties?
Yeah, in my view, brand has to be included, because under the broad definition of property, brand will come. And there are many companies where the parent companies allow the subsidiary, mainly subsidiary company, to use its brand, and many of the good companies have developed, even before the introduction of related party transaction concept, even before that, many of the companies have included the use of brand, what is the consideration, etc., which has to be paid by the subsidiary companies, etc. It's already there. So according to me, it has to be included.
Okay. Sir, the way related party is defined in transaction and in LODR and NDS, it talks about transfer of resources, services, or obligation, irrespective of whether a price is charged or not. How does one comply with that, sir? Specifically, you've been sitting on audit committees. That's question one. And the second question to you is, generally, when you talk about ordinary course, arm's length, in any transaction, the board generally, I'm saying about majority of the board, generally feels this is something an audit committee is going to do. The audit committee in turn may take recourse to auditor certificate, CEO, CFO certificates or all. But nonetheless, buck stops at audit committee at the end because they need to approve. Would you have any situations where you say that audit committee has approved something which is an ordinary course and arm's length, and the board takes a different, and if the board takes a different view, how do you handle this, sir?
Yeah, I think first point first, the definition. If you look at the definition, the accounting standard of the SEBI definition says transfer of resources or use of resources, whether a price is charged or not. Now that's the definition of an accounting standard. The LODR has taken that definition, and I think when this was under consideration, prior to its issuance, the SEBI had called few people for discussion on informal basis. I happen to be one of them, since I happen to be the audit committee chairman in one company. So when I explained to him that when you put this definition across, what would happen is, let me say, in a group, X group, it owns a very big building in, let's say, Fountain area. One floor is given to one company for which price is charged, the rent is paid, it's a related party transaction. Second floor is given to another company, and since that company is not making good profit, there is no rent charge to that. Now, if there is no rent charge to that, it will not enter the books of accounts because there is no money paid, there is no accounting transaction. And I purposely put this sentence before him saying that in that case, by the definition, it becomes a related party transaction because it's a transfer of resources whether money is paid or not. But as of today, it is not captured. And how do you think it should be captured? I think the officer was well prepared. He said, look, you are a chartered accountant. Your institute has given this definition. So we have just taken the definition for our control. So I think it was a very nice reply from him. So I think that's the starting point. I'm looking at this forum more as an academic discussion, therefore I put it this way, that this is the starting point. The next answer to that from my side at least was, accounting is very clear. When you pay money for something, it enters the books of accounts. If you do not pay or receive something, it does not enter the books of accounts. And to that extent, the standard remains what it is. But now if you make it a part of LODR, how do you think companies are going to deal with it? I think that's the distinction. So, would it mean that for any company or a group of companies, Narayan is here, now a company must be owning a tower. Now in that tower, there might be 25 companies which are running their offices. For some companies you are charging rent, for some companies you may not be charging rent. Now, where you are charging rent is a related party, but where you are not charging, are the companies declaring them as related party transaction? To the best of my knowledge, no. And therefore I did not take the name of any company, but everyone can look at his own or her own situation and see. There are two ways theoretically that one will have to deal with it. It would mean one will have to draw a complete chart of what you own. And what you own, are you really using it yourself or somebody else is using it? And if somebody else is using it, are you charging for it or not charging it? Yeah, the pricing, the arm's length will be the second stage. The first is, are you charging it? And the second thing will be, you look at what you are using and are you using what is your own or you are using something which belongs to some other company. I think there are two stages in which one will have to go through that. I do not believe that that kind of an exercise is done. So to that extent, all of us merrily are within the definition on the ground that as long as the price is not paid, it doesn't enter the books of accounts, and since it does not enter the books of accounts, it doesn't get identified as a related party transaction. But I would say academically, this is a dispute between the definitions and the practical part of it. I don't have a solution. If somebody has a solution to this.
Can I give us a perspective on this?
Yeah.
Because Ind AS talks about it's basically founded on substance over form, coming out of IFRS. So that kind of transaction which you are talking about, this would be, to the extent that the concession is given, it will be taken as finance kind of a thing. And once the actual transaction is counted, then it will be automatically at arm's length and it will become in the ordinary course of business if it is strictly prepared as per IFRS. Is that what is the intention?
Even with Ind AS today, there are umpteen companies which have this situation. And I agree with your theory that the substance or form is a principle which has been adopted by the Ind AS. But to tell you very clearly, the question of substance or form existed in India from 1985 when the standards were drafted. Now the IFRS and Ind AS has given it so much importance that it overtakes the law. Earlier we always used to believe that the standards and the law will both will coexist simultaneously. Now the IFRS and Ind AS believe that whatever may be the legal position, the substance over form to a great extent will overtake that situation. So even now with Ind AS, if the resources are used for which price is not paid, it doesn't enter the books of accounts. And something which does not enter the books of accounts does not get identified as a related party transaction.
So to that extent, it's the Ind AS is not followed. Actually,
It's a law which is not followed.
I mean, and that's-
But I think that will be very harsh words to be used. Sometimes, what happens is all of us try to bring so many principles into the legal system that it becomes impossible to achieve them. I think that seems to be our psychology, that we try and bring in so much into the law with so much of enthusiasm that it is difficult to implement in letter and spirit, with the result that either all are not following it, or the system can catch those who are easy to catch in the process. I think that's as far as the technicality of the definition is concerned. The second part, so that's
Second point was board relying on
Yeah,
audit
sorry,
committee
yeah.
and audit.
I think that's a more interesting point. Typically today, if you look at the system, it's the audit committee which has to approve the related party transactions. To take a very quick view of this, there are some people and experts who believe that if everything is at ordinary course of business and it is at arm's length, it did not even go to the audit committee. And there are arguments between the auditors and the companies at various levels where they start arguing that such a transaction should not even go to the audit committee. I think that's a very extreme kind of an argument. RPTs have to go through the audit committee and the process thereafter. The next point is, if you look at the overall regulations, what it says is that the audit committee would approve the RPTs and the company should put on their website their related party transactions policy. Now a quick look at many policies indicate that they are all more or less similar. It's the same English coming in the different names in different companies. So I think that's not a problem. Why a company would like to spell something more or less, and therefore policies are more or less similar. Now within that norms, if a company tries to go through only the audit committee process and thereafter if the board at some illustration doesn't accept the proposition, naturally the board will supersede it. The problem will be the RPT has done the prior approval and the transaction will have gone through, and the board can, theoretically I am saying, if it comes into the way, there will be a problem. And therefore the way forward is, and that's what we have done at some places, that within the related party policy, the company should draft related party transactions guidelines. The manner in which the policy will be implemented will be spelled out in nuts and bolts, giving various details. Such a policy and the transaction guidelines would be put up to the board. The board in a way would guide the audit committee that you please look into the matters under these guidelines. So automatically the audit committee is one way taking the directions from the board, because audit committee is a creation of the board. Let audit committee not start doing something which is not to the knowledge of the board. Now once that is done, that the guidelines are there, the guidelines are formulated, they are put up to the board, you can say for noting or approval, whatever it is, and the audit committee works in accordance with the guidelines. As you go through the year, you get experience of new transactions, you might get something more, you can amend the guidelines, put it to the board for information, and so on and so forth. I think that works well, so that the situation of audit committee saying something and the board not saying something does not arise. And audit committee also has the satisfaction that it has informed the board about the manner in which it will operate itself on those matters. I think that's a better way to tackle the situation.
No, the question, the reason why I asked that question, sir, is as you're aware, under the Companies Amendment Bill, one of the things which they are proposing is that if a transaction is in ordinary course and arm's length, and if the audit committee yet doesn't approve it, some companies did come and deposed before the committee and representations were made, was that then the board actually does not have any explicit role under the purview of the Companies Act. So today the Companies Amendment Bill is now getting a situation of saying a transaction is perfectly in OCB and AL, yet if the audit committee disapproves of that transaction, please take it up to the board with your reasons thereof and let the board take a decision. And some industries, at least I am told, is it is like the way they mentioned the child getting a little bit naughty in front of the parents and saying that it may be OCB and AL, but I am not approving it. And the board gets power only if it is not, if you don't fulfill either of this dual asset test. Your view, sir?
I think what is being proposed is more appropriate because the audit committee is a creation of the board. It's a part of the board. Tomorrow audit committee cannot abrogate itself so much powers that we won't do it. I can only remember one similar position which existed in the Companies Act. On various accounting matters, the Companies Act 1956 very clearly stated, and I think that exists even today, that the audit committee can put up to the board its own views about certain matters. It is quite likely that the board doesn't accept that proposition. The board can overturn it. The only point is the board had to report to the shareholders that this was the view of the audit committee. We have not approved it. We have taken a contrary view, and this is what we have done. And I think that used to go to the general body. So I would say what is amended is the same analogy. That means audit committee cannot be taking itself so many rights that they just say we won't do it. And especially since it was an accounting matter on which the provision existed, saying that if you take a view, the board is still in a position to take a contrary view. Only thing is the board is obliged to report it to the shareholders. And I know of two instances in the past where some of my friends sitting in some positions were not approving certain matters, not a related party transaction, but some accounting treatment. And they recommended to the board that, look, this is not in line. A good tussle between the board, but the board said, look, we are overcoming it. We will say we are approving it. Then the audit committee chairman was so strong, he said, then you'll have to take it to the shareholders because the right of the company said you'll have to take it to the shareholders. Then the chairman realized that this is a tough game, and therefore then they went back and said that okay, we'll follow the advice.
One point, in that case, the audit committee functions become a mockery, especially when the board does not recommend or only reporting to the shareholder that we have not implemented the.
I totally agree. Therefore, I narrated this, that it went to the extent of the board initially saying that we overcome the matter. When the audit committee chairman had the politeness but the courage to communicate that in that case you'll have to go to the shareholders.
Now, since he has raised,
Violation of the Companies Act.
No, I agree.
No,
We are- I'll just try to see what he is trying to say. He is perhaps referring to a recent case where there was a related party transaction. It was done prior to the advent of the related party coming in, but once it comes after RPT is kicking in, the audit committee and the board abdicating itself in a manner of speaking and asking the shareholders to approve. Would it be right, sir? Of course, finally the resolution didn't get approved and it got defeated. But today, when the audit committee has a role, can a situation, we never thought that a situation could ever come, that the audit committee and the board is going not to recommend to the shareholders and they are going to say, we are not in a position to comment and shareholders, you take a call. I think that's what he's trying to.
I think the case is so famous that it is better not to comment on that. However, it is like this, on a lighter side I would say, in a financial circle it is stated that on a credit matter, those who do not take decisions reach to the position of chairman very fast.
Oh no.
This is on a lighter side. The point is that if somebody is appointed to do something, somebody is asked to do something, I think it is obligatory that we must take a call, we must take a decision. So I think those who did not take a decision, what can we say?
The audit committee itself is part of the board.
Correct. Yeah.
So they should have they should have taken the call on that. I agree with you. Yeah, but the point which I mentioned was exactly contrary. The audit committee had taken a view that this particular accounting treatment is not right. The board was trying to say that it is right. Then the committee chairman pointed out to the chairman of the board that in that case you will have to report to the shareholders that we have suggested this, you are not following this. How will you deal with it? Then the whole board saw some reasoning in it and they said, okay, we'll follow the advice of the audit committee chairman. I think that's all. Sorry.
Sir, if a transaction is in ordinary course of business and at arm's length, then what can be the reason for audit committee to reject that transaction?
No, I'm not saying they should reject, but even such transactions should be looked into by the audit committees. There are some people who are saying that such transactions need not be looked into by anybody. Transactions which are in the ordinary course of business, transactions which are arm's length, the short point is, does it require approval, prior approval?
So the audit committee's role is sort of a technical role in a subject of this nature, whereas the board's role will be sort of a business
Absolutely.
approach.
That's right.
So there can be a broader view by the board, keeping in the perspective of the business objectives to be achieved.
Quite right.
So they may not have difficulty in explaining to shareholders. That is what is the probably underlying the point of the concept
I agree.
of going from audit.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Hari, let me come to you. In a big conglomerate like yours, you will have sharing of lot of services, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is utilities, whether it is even your SAP module. What would really be a right way of apportioning cost vis-a-vis your subsidiaries, associates? Should it be a sort of a marginal costing to be done because you've already spent a lot of amount, for example, of setting up a SAP? Each new entity which comes in, what should really be the right way is question number one. Question number two is again close to our hearts, is that of KMP. In big corporates, you will have a person at the holdco and also being a KMP in one of the subsidiaries. And subsidiary includes subsidiaries as plural, and you have many corporates where the KMP is doubling up in more than one subsidiary. And some places you can have an apportionment in terms of time, but sometimes it may not even be possible. Your view, Sari.
Yeah, in a business conglomerate, what happens is for economy, there will be lots of services at the centralized level, but it will be shared by all the companies. Now, what is the basis of allocation? It can be anything based on, depending upon the item, it can be based on the number of employees. You are talking about a SAP, etc. It could be based on the licenses which are distributed. So it's all, you can follow the costing principle and allocate based on the transaction and the situation. But the issue here is, you see what is the basis or what is the objective of related party transaction. Let me tell you, we have been discussing about related party transactions. I think not all related party transactions are bad. You know, it is seen from a very different perspective, which is not at all correct. After all, why people are putting a lot of efforts to disclose related party transactions? It is for the reader, just to enable the reader to read the financial statement subject to disclosure of related party and the related party transactions. Because there is a perception that the transaction, if it was entered into with a third party, you would have not have agreed with the same terms and conditions. And therefore the reader has got a different perspective. As such, it is not bad. If you look at AS 18, IGAP AS 18, you will find a para which says that there could be a situations when, for example, a holding and subsidiary company, where the subsidiary company's products has no market at all, but the parent company comes to the rescue and takes it. So in such a situation, it is not bad. If you see the overall shareholder value, it has only enhanced. So related party transaction as such is not bad. It all depends upon the situation. So long as you are transparent, now you are disclosing, there should not be an issue. So in a conglomerate, there are lots of, as I said, centralized services. It could be security, it could be sharing of your transit houses, it should be sharing of your holiday homes, so many things. If you look at from a subsidiary point of view, if they had availed of these services from outside, probably they would have paid more, much more than what they would have got it from the parent company. So overall, if you take both together, it is good. And not only that, if you have, let us have your big factory, big compound, and you have got a lot of space. So from an economic point of view, it is better that you house both the parent company and the subsidiary company in the same place, and both of them get benefits. So you have to see that. Only thing is, as Mr. Chikla explained, it's very important in such a situation to have guidelines for all types of transactions the group generally deal with. It's very important, and it's better that you spell out for each type of transaction what is the nature of service, what will be the basis of allocation, etc., and get it approved by the board, both by the audit committee and the board. It's very important, and keep on telling the audit committee that as far as the policy or the guidelines are concerned, every time you go to them, probably every quarter, you tell them that whatever transactions we are doing, they're all in line with the guidelines, in line with the policy. I think that will give an idea, and probably you can avoid conflicts between the board and the audit committee. I don't think it will happen. I think we should also remember that audit committee consists of technical experts, so they may have more knowledge about accounting and related matters. So their views generally are always accepted by the board. There should not be any issue. And as far as KMP is concerned, yes, again, all the companies have a policy of transferring executive. It could be from the parent to the subsidiary or subsidiary to the parent, associate companies, etc. It helps the individuals also in their advancement of their career. So one way is to see that, you can again take resort to the Companies Act, which has got which has laid down certain limits for remuneration, etc. One way of saying is that if supposing it's a loss-making company or a company which is making inadequate profits, probably you can debit the subsidiary company to the extent that is allowed under the Companies Act, which is allowed. So that can be one way of doing it, but definitely you have to pass on the debits to the subsidiary and associate companies to the extent you are rendering service. And I think that is what we generally follow.
But Hari, the point was really, how do you really...
This particular situation of audit recommendation the board is not accepting, does it merit qualification in the audit report?
In fact, when Mr. Chitale raised this point, I was curious to ask this question. What was the comments of the auditors in that particular situation? If really there is a conflict between the board and the audit committee, I expect it is some matter relating to accounting or interpretation of certain terms or compliance with accounting standards, accounting policy. I'm sure the statutory auditors would have some views on that, and I don't know. I'm curious to know about that. But if it's really a technical matter, definitely it has to be disclosed in the financial statement. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. When and this was a listed company, I won't take the name because one of my friends was there as the audit committee chairman. The moment this matter got flared up, the meeting was postponed by one day. They tried to understand between themselves as to can they understand each other, because by that time the auditors had taken the position that what the audit committee is saying is right. But when the board was going the other way, the auditors also had a tough time to decide how will they deal with it. After I think good amount of discussions between the board, finally when the board accepted the audit committee position, the audit reports was what it would have been. But I entirely agree with you that if such a conflict arises, it will normally arise only on a very technical subject of accounting treatment of certain subjects or disclosure or non-disclosure of certain subjects, and the auditors will definitely take a very serious view of the matter. In the sense, they will have to consider how are they dealing with it. Whether it will amount to qualification or not will depend upon the materiality and other events, but definitely they would look at the subject more carefully.
There's a question which Shankar raised. I would like to, for example, let us say you have got shared services, and that shared service center processes the payroll, etc., of not only the parent company but also all the subsidiary associate companies. Under the Companies Act and under the LODR, you will treat it as a related party transaction. But I would like to know from an Ind AS perspective, you can also look at it as a pass-through transaction. It's really speaking, there is no transfer of resources, etc., is reflected in the Ind AS 24. So will you consider it as a pass-through transaction? Similarly, reimbursement of expenses. You are only merely reimbursing the expenses. Does it really come to a situation of related party transaction from an Ind AS perspective, I would like to know.
Sure. But before that, Hari, just one more question on that KMP which we were discussing. While the Companies Act requires, they call it a whole time KMP, and at the same breath it also allows sharing of KMPs between a holding and subsidiary. How do you really beat the whole time blues, what you can say? Either some companies take a call that how is a KMP or a company secretary whole time in two companies? It doesn't talk of whole time employment, and we go back to our old 383A Companies Act 1956 and the Gujarat High Court, which clearly demarcated contract of service and contract for service. Second, a lot of companies are taking a call that yes, how is whole time being, what I can say, being complied with is, in a manner of speaking, is that while you will have a subsidiary, the concerned KMP is available to the subsidiary or associate whole time, and as such we are complying, and it makes sense because you will have multiple subsidiaries. They may not be able to afford to have independent KMPs at each level.
See, before the introduction of this 2013 Act, even under the old Act, one person who is an MD of one company could act as an MD of another company. But there was a doubt even then whether a whole-time, the word used was whole-time director, whether he can be a whole-time director of two companies. And the assumption was whole-time director is supposed to devote his whole time to the company. So probably people took a view that in the case of MD, yes, he can be an MD of two companies, or a manager can be a manager of two companies, but not full-time director. But with the introduction of KMP, that gets more confused. Okay, but then KMP can be a full-time. At the same time, even under I think the new Act also, there is a provision that a person can be a KMP of its subsidiary.
In the holding and subsidiary.
But it all depends upon the situation. There could be many subsidiaries. For example, company secretary, especially if it is an unlisted company, the work related to a company secretary will not be that compared to a listed company. So probably he can act as a company secretary of a second company. I don't think there is any doubt. Similarly, even the MD, it all depends upon the nature of work, whether he is able to devote his time, whether he is able to justify his role, dual role. That is, I think that is more important. And I think it all depends upon the circumstances of each case, and then we have to take a decision. The law, I don't think, is so clear about it, but so long as your intentions are good, so long as you practice governance, I don't think there should be any issue.
Sure. Sir, over to you. Hari did initiate this topic on Ind AS, and one point we always thought is under the Companies Act and ASAT, both control was much more easier to establish, but under Ind AS, sir, it is much more judgmental. You have to see a lot of things, what you say, what we call it, piercing the corporate veil, where you see pass-through transactions. You have options and convertible to be taken into account in Ind AS. You have got a lot of structured entities like trusts, and entities under trust which once upon a time would never be considered as a subsidiary or an associate. Today, depending on the control you exercise, that particular entities today are also coming within the purview of Ind AS. With such judgmental, do you think the auditor's role in specifically determining the related party universe is becoming more and more subjective, and as such, it's no longer Q secutus, which we call it. It has to be on an ongoing basis discussions with management. And specifically to add one more point to you, where we have not only control but also de facto control, which is observed under Ind AS. And under de facto control, a minor change in shareholding could get you in and out, which we call. You can get into the related party, again get out.